several members of Congress. We'll go to Cannon Rotunda right now, where Representative Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, is standing by. And Mr. Van Hollen, if I could just begin with President Obama's comments last night that he proposes a 5-year spending freeze on discretionary spending. What was your reaction? What do you think?
Well, good morning, Greta. I thought that the president signaled that he was very serious about making sure the government lives within its means. He pointed out that families across the country are engaged in belt tightening, and the federal government has to do the same thing. At the same time, he said we have to prioritize, and we need to continue to make investments in things like clean energy and biotechnology, in things that can make sure that we retain our competitive edge. You know, the president talked about this being our Sputnik moment, and the message there was the president, none of us should be settling for number 2. We've got to make sure we maintain our competitive edge going forward.
So, but on the spending side of it, would you agree, and do you think the rest of the Democrats on the Budget Committee are going to agree to this 5-year freeze?
Well, this is going to require some painful choices, but yes, I do think that we'll be able to come together to support the president's proposal in that regard, and it will require, as he indicated, prioritizing. But that is what we have to do, and even as we do that, we need to work together to put together a sustainable, long-term plan toward deficit and debt reduction, and that's an important component of it.
Where do you see compromise on spending cuts? Where can the two sides agree?
Well, we're at the beginning of that process right now. Clearly, we should always be looking for efficiency gains and productivity gains. Then you get into cutting into the meat of some of these things, and that's where it's easy to talk in general terms about these big cuts across the board, but it's much more difficult when it comes to specific programs. And that's why we've challenged our Republican colleagues who are calling for some very immediate, deep, draconian cuts to let us know whether they're planning on cutting, for example, research into cancer and diabetes around the country, or exactly where they're proposing to cut. Let me make this point, because the president laid out a responsible path last night. There are some who are calling for very deep, immediate cuts. That actually is against the advice of the bipartisan commission charged with deficit and debt reduction. They said we got to put our country on a sustainable path going forward, and we need to act now to do that. But they also said immediate, very draconian cuts would hurt the economy and slow down job growth. So you need the balance.
Let's go to Westland, Michigan. Dave is a Democrat joining us. You're on the air with Representative Chris Van Hollen. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I want to talk about health insurance. I want to talk about, I went online a couple of years ago and bought some car insurance that was out of the state of Michigan. And then when I wrecked my car, they just would not pay to get it fixed. And the guy at the bump shop said that happens all the time with these out-of-state insurance companies. And, now I switched over to AAA and I have no problem, but I would never, ever buy insurance, and especially health insurance across state line. I wouldn't trust somebody with my life.
Congressman?
Well, the caller raises a very important point about consumer protection, and that's why some of these, easy-sounding solutions that are put forth sometimes by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle really can jeopardize patient and consumer protection, because you don't want to be buying insurance from a fly-by-night operation. Now, as part of the health reform bill, what we did say is that the Federal Office of Personnel Management will be able to put together national structures that will allow consumers to be able to purchase insurance in a way that they know will safeguard their interests. It's modeled in some ways after the Federal Employees Health Benefit Plan, and allows Americans that purchasing power, but with the protections that you would have in a state system, the protections, for example, that federal employees, including members of Congress, have as part of their plan. We say we want to make sure the American people have that benefit as well.
Rich on the Republican line in Marion, Ohio. Morning, Rich.
Yeah, how you doing? Okay. He's had 2 years to create jobs for U.S. citizens. He has successfully created jobs for China. He also has a problem with illegals coming in, 2 million a year currently. And if you divide that out, it's 200,000 with additional ones that we don't know are coming across the border. Now he wants to add a couple, 400,000 a month more of jobs that he does not have for more illegals to come in. If maybe the way we solve our problem is get jobs for illegals, and then the U.S. will get some. I'll hang up and listen to the answer.
Well, first of all, as I think people viewing this program know, 2 years ago, when the president was sworn in, our economy was in total free fall. We were in deep recession, headed to another Great Depression. The Congress and the president had to act quickly, and as a result, millions of people have jobs today who would otherwise be out of work. And that's not me saying that. You've got economists from both sides of the political spectrum, all sides of the political spectrum, recognizing that things would be a lot worse. Now, we all understand that when you've got 9.5% unemployment, that's cold comfort to people who don't have a job. And that's why the president's focus last night was on accelerating the economic recovery and putting people back to work. Some of those proposals are already beginning. For example, he created an incentive, a tax incentive for businesses to invest immediately by allowing them to write off 100% of their investment over the next year. But he's also focused on the long term. And when he called it the Sputnik moment, he was saying we're not settling for number two. And we know from our past history that making these important investments as a people is essential to our competitiveness in the international arena.
Congressman, as a ranking member on the House Budget Committee, what was your reaction to the response given by your chairman, Paul Ryan, Republican of Wisconsin? Where do you see, as ranking member, that you're going to have to push back against the Republicans?
Well, I agree with Paul Ryan to this extent. It's going to be important for both parties to work together to try and tackle the deficits and the debt. And that's what the president said last night, that he was serious about getting together with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to do exactly that. I was disappointed that Paul Ryan spent a fair amount of time talking about repealing the health care reform bill. I don't think the American people want to relitigate that whole argument. They don't want to start from scratch. People are recognizing the important consumer and patient protections that are in that bill. For example, your kids can't be denied health insurance because they've got diabetes or asthma. You can keep your kids on your insurance policy till the age of 26. Small businesses are getting tax credits. So I don't think people want to wipe all that out. We recognize, as the president said, that we've got to make changes and adjustments as we move along. But this preoccupation with just, throwing the whole thing out, I think takes us in the wrong direction. And as the nonpartisan and independent Congressional Budget Office indicated, it would also add to our deficit debt because that health care bill began finally to bend the cost curves over a period of time. Let me just say, a previous caller had talked about the immigration issue. The president has said, look, let's work together on a bipartisan basis to address some of the issues the caller was talking about. And the president has beefed up border security, doing more to try and make sure that we enforce the laws of the country. But he also recognizes that this is a problem that we need to solve together. And that's what he was talking about last night.
We mentioned to our viewers that the Congressional Budget Office is going to this morning come out with their outlook for 2011. What are you expecting?
Well, I think they're going to show that the economy is improving, and as a result, there will be some more revenues coming in to the government. Obviously, the most important thing about the economy improving is when people get back to work, and that needs to be the focus of our efforts. But the Congressional Budget Office report will also indicate that we have large deficits and debt in the out years, and that's why it's important that we act now to put in place a plan that reduces the deficit. It's got to be a balanced plan that takes us to much lower deficits and eliminating the debt over a period of time. It's counterproductive, as the president's own bipartisan commission said, to try and do all that in 6 months. I mean, that would be a recipe for hurting the economy and throwing people out of work. So
when will Democrats put forth a plan that takes on entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare?
Well, the president